Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. I feel so privileged you are taking time out of your busy life to learn all about the ways to interpret neurodivergence for you and your child. Remember, all advice on this podcast is general and may not specifically apply to your child, so we encourage you to also talk to your GP, paediatrician or specialist to see if what you've learned will help your family. Hello, and welcome once again to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. Today, we're looping back into a definition episode. Natalie and I have been trying for quite a while to manage to get this one to line up, so it feels really great that we're finally able to get the time to chat. You'll notice that this is quite a long and in-depth episode, so you may want to listen to it over a couple of sessions. You may want to go back and re-listen to it. There is a lot of information in this particular episode regarding learning disorders. Natalie is very knowledgeable and extremely passionate about the topic, and we've benefited through the in-depth discussion that we've had today. So I think you'll get a lot out of this one. Natalie is the director of Thrive Specialist Resource and Community Centre and president of its governing charity, Thrive Teach Nurture Grow Incorporated. She's a special education teacher and consultant dedicated to protecting, supporting and empowering children and teens with hidden disabilities such as dyslexia. Natalie is passionate about research and evidence-based practices and the student's voice. Natalie is senior trainer in structured literacy and an associate member of the Australian Dyslexia Association. You'll also notice today that she references Ausspelled and Spelled, which are Australian and state bodies around learning difficulties, in particular dyslexia, and they provide a lot of today's definitions. I'll provide more information on them in the show notes if you're interested. So buckle up for a really great chat. Hello, Natalie. So incredibly excited to have you here today. It's taken us a few misfires over time getting to have a chat.
Thank you so much for having me, Carly. I really feel very honoured to be asked. You've had some amazing presenters and some great chats. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Both of us have had some normal family life, kid life interruptions. So, we're coming at this from a level place, which is great.
Yeah. Thank you.
So talking dyslexia and touching on some connected other learning disorders today. We were talking off air about how I'm really hoping that this episode is a great opportunity for parents who have got a little bit of a bubbling thought going in their mind about could this be something that might be happening to my child, and we can provide a little bit of clarity as to whether or not it's something that can explore. And having you with all of your passion and experience is going to make this a really valuable conversation. So do you want to start by describing the disorders? And I know that's a really big ask, but we can start high and we can dig down as we go.
Do you know what? Thank you, because I think we can go into such detail, right? But I think if we're really thinking as parents, what is dyslexia and what is it that would first flag? It's that idea that it's unexpected difficulties with reading and spelling in dyslexia's case, and in regards to language-based dysgraphia, it's that unexpected difficulty with writing and dyscalculia, unexpected difficulties with numbers particularly. So kind of drilling down into that a little bit more, it just means that, you've got a child who's got some really at least average to even above average cognitive abilities. Their general abilities seem, quite on track, and yet they're still having difficulty with this one particular area. And so when it comes, it's when we talk about dyslexia, really, that even what the word means in Greek is difficulty with words. So in its simplest form, dyslexia is that difficulty converting sounds on a page to symbols and then symbols to sounds. It's definitely neurological. So we actually can see the wiring differences under functional MRI in the brain. And so is language-based dysgraphia and dyscalculia. So they're neurological, they're unexpected, and they really have their truest difficulties in accuracy and fluency. So how automatic you can be with something. So in dyslexia, you're really looking at difficulty with accurate and fluent word reading, like single word reading, like those good old sight words, but they may also have accuracy, fluency difficulties with sounds. And then eventually that can complicate sort of comprehension and that kind of thing. With dysgraphia, language-based dysgraphia, it's the accuracy and fluency of written expression. And we can drill down into these a little bit more about what they particularly look like in kiddies, but as a whole, it's that accuracy and fluency point. With dyscalculia, it's quite specific to numbers and number sense. So I'll drill down into that a bit for you as well. But from a formal definitions point of view, I would go to the International Dyslexia Association. We do, at the moment, internationally, there's a few definitions floating around. So the British Dyslexia Association has a bit of a different one. It's very simple. They're all very similar. But generally, and in Australia, we do recognise the International Dyslexia Association's definition. And I think the reason why there's a couple, of variants is because they're still really drilling down into the cause of dyslexia. And that's still very much into, we're very much looking at symptomatic sort of behaviours, but and we can see the brain has definitely has its origin there, but they're still looking into further causes, and that might change its definition in time. Ausspelled, as you mentioned, is also Australia's sort of go-to, and they're the association now that all of the spelled networks around Australia, which is a specific learning difficulties organisations, they all come together under Ausspelled. And so Ausspelled used the International Dyslexia Association's definition. And the main point I probably want to make is that it's unexpected for their cognitive abilities, and even despite how much provision they've been given in the class, was still struggling. That's the child you want to look further into.
And that's actually it's a really great consistency. Might not be the perfect way of phrasing what I'm trying to say, but I think the parents who've been listening along, and where every time we seem to talk about understanding a new neurodivergence or a neurodivergence that they may not have understood, it is about looking for those behaviours that are the unexpected.
Yes.
And that get in the way of their capacity to live the way that their peers have the capacity to do.
Yeah. Exactly right. And I mean, you can get more specific. So, we can look at what, so that Ausspelled guide, can I just say, if there was ever, if you're a parent with a niggle and you perhaps you brought it up with the teacher and they're not quite seeing it, or like we have in many cases, while the children are quite young, the teachers may be reluctant to be committing too much to anything yet, and they're doing a bit of a wait and see model, which we don't recommend. But go onto Ausspell's website, and it's a free downloadable resource, and it has everything that you could possibly need to know as a parent. And it includes this beautiful chart that shows you sort of what children before school, in early years of school, and sort of later years of school, all the different little characteristics that you might see. And so I think that's another amazing resource for that reason.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, from the context of, for me, so I've got Mr. 8, Mr. 6, and Miss 4. And Mr. 8, we've got 2E. So he's ASD, ADHD, a range of other things, but he's 2E. So very bright, doesn't always know how to access that intelligence.
Yes.
Exceptionally bright. And so he has a very sporadic display of when he has the capacity to do things that are academic, all regulation based. Whereas Mr. 6, he has FASD, which has given him a whole range of neurological complexities. Academia was really, really challenging. And so my expectations, I guess, of how he will work through and how we support him is another thing. Riley.
Yes.
And then Miss 4, we're in the process of getting assessed for gifts. And
Oh,
the really great opportunity of having a checklist like that is that
yeah.
even as a parent, you
Mm.
don't know the baseline because you only
Mm.
know what's happening to your own children. So to be
That's right.
able to see that across the board, this is where things should be, and that gut feeling you got is absolutely correct.
100%.
So powerful for parents.
So powerful. It gives you that real opportunity to validate what you're feeling and that gut, like you said. But in that guide too, it also talks about exclusionary criteria. And I think in my work and in our workplace at the moment, that's something that is really hard conversation to have with parents at times, because dyslexia and any specific learning disorder actually it's very specific in its diagnosis. And if a child does have an intellectual disability, then that their struggles perhaps with reading and writing and spelling and all these things are likely to be tricky. And so I think it's important to look at these guides, and so that you can understand, okay, well, if I did go down the path of assessment, what is the assessor looking for? What's that psychologist going to, and the teacher's looking for? And am I on the right track? You're right. They're so helpful, but this particular guide, just has all of those questions answered as well. So yes, very, very helpful.
Brilliant.
I think the other thing to remember too, even in saying that, then, is that your beautiful kitties, it's still the rule in specific learning disorders as well, that that the co-occurrence is more the rule than the exception. So it does, dyslexia has got a bestie in ADHD. Um, and even ASD profiles, they can very commonly co-occur. And they can act alone, as we know as well. But it is important to have all of, read as much as you can, or listen. Here we are today, as much as you can,
Yes.
so that you can just fulfill those little gut inquiries. Yeah.
I feel like in the conversations that I've had, and this is just completely reinforcing that it would be amazing to engage a graphic designer to
Oh yeah.
draw a mind map or a cloud map of the common comorbidities amongst
Yes.
neurodivergents,
Yeah.
um, because they just often are so interconnected.
Yes.
Um, and the really hard part about that, if we don't understand those connections,
Mm.
is that one of those neurodivergences will often take the lead and everything else kind of gets hidden underneath. So it's really great to understand that they can have this co-occurrence
Mm.
and to make sure that, so for ADHD's example,
Yeah.
some of that, if they are often, looking elsewhere in the classroom,
Yeah.
it might be because they're intentionally avoiding the reading activity. They know
Oh,
that it doesn't feel comfortable for them.
I feel so much for our psychologists at work, I tell you, because they have to discern between the child who is actively avoiding, as you said, because perhaps the content is too hard, it's coming more from a learning difficulty or disorder, um, and then the child who perhaps has attention and focus difficulties, and that's playing into the reason that they're not
Yep.
able to attend.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, so is which one is affecting the learning the most? Do they co-occur, or is it actually more just a behavioural way of this child coping with their dyslexia? And that's, we often have, and we work with the most beautiful children, and I often describe our children as the most, they're the best, they're the bravest. Oh my gosh, they turn up every day with this, for want of a better, this hidden disability, this hidden difficulty, and they have to face the whole day of literacy, this literate society inside and outside of the school setting, and keep turning up, keep showing up, and keep having to ask for help. I mean, think how resilient you have to become in order to. You have to keep
My
putting your hand up
goodness.
for help every day.
Yep.
Gosh.
Yeah, they are. They're the bravest little kids, you know?
100%. All, yeah,
Um, yeah,
all of them.
to
But
be persistent, to be driven, to
yes,
be it's pretty amazing.
it is
Amazing.
100%. So I think it is. I do find psychologists have to be, and I think that's probably a thing for parents to know too. When if you do go down the track of assessing, you need somebody who works in that space,
Yep.
all the time, because that psychologist actually has to have a lot of knowledge. If it's a psychologist that works in quite a broad area, um, I don't know. I'd be looking for the one that has real specialty.
Yes.
Developmental or educational psychologist is who you're looking for. It's
Yep.
quite complex. It really is. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. All of these little pieces of the puzzle that we're putting together for people. I love it. It's so
Yeah.
good. And look at
We've
it.
already gone off track like a couple of times. So I'm coming back. I'm coming back.
Hey, everybody who listens to this show knows that we love a side
Yeah.
quest. I almost need to get a side quest klaxon because
Yeah.
they're always look, the facts are great. They really are. They're exceptionally powerful. But sharing those gems that we have from lived experience that come from time spent in the trenches that we can give other parents, they can know before the trenches.
Yes.
It's really awesome.
100%. How good would that have been? When we both, because I have, so my daughter is 15 now and dyslexic and has ADHD. And so, as especially in my work as well, I find it so valuable that as a parent, I can say, I get it.
Mhm.
I'm with you 100% in your morning and in your afternoon, um, as much as, what I know we need in the day, regarding our learning, achievements and challenges. So, it is that lived experience. I'm with you.
Yeah. 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 It's brilliant. And look, it's also really interesting how many people end up in the sector,
How?
the allied health space,
Yes.
anything connected to the neurodivergent
Mhm.
space because they understand what it's like from a parent's point of view. So
Yeah.
that's why we're here doing what we do and going on the journey that we're both going on. We've taken a passion and sort of run with it. So um,
Yeah.
I'm really excited that you want to talk about myths because I think it's such a great tool to have. I think, from boomer parents
Yes.
to teachers who have been teachers for too long,
Yes.
uh, GPs who have been stuck with one particular type of clientele. These sort of things allow us to sit there and go, well, actually, sorry, please bust us
Let,
some myths.
let's do it. So I think the first thing we have to remember then, so if we just talk about dyslexia, if you don't mind, for the minute,
Mm,
because I think language-based dysgraphia is on its way.
yes.
Professionally, we know all about it, and we know that the statistics of prevalence is still the same as dyslexia. Same with dyscalculia. You've still got that 1 in 10 to 1 in 5, depending on around the world. So it's just as prevalent, but I think we still need to get into that. They're sort of their own.
Mm,
I'll talk about dyslexia because I think it's got more reach at the moment,
beautiful.
more understanding. So, oh my gosh, can I just then firstly say that what dyslexia is to do with how the brain processes language. So I think the biggest thing, I mean, I was at a little stall, a community stall, and just, answering questions. It was just like, come on up. How can I help? And, how many people told me, oh, yes, I think my child may be dyslexic, or and because the words jump around on the page and they reverse their letters. And so I have to do quite a lot of chatting about this actually, because the reversing of letters um, is not a dyslexic trait. It's not actually one of the identifiable, characteristics for assessment. In fact, the reversing of letters has a lot more to do with visual processing, might have to do more with working with memory, might have to do more with left to right orientations, working memory struggles. Maybe, that child just missed, it never really anchored well the formation. So it's not a dyslexic trait. And while children with dyslexia may reverse their letters, apparently it's something like about 20% of people without dyslexia may also. So, you're really reversing letters is generally considered sort of normal up until about the age of 7. After 7, if you're reversing letters, then you might want to look into it more with an OT from a visual processing point, but it doesn't necessarily mean your child is dyslexic. Doesn't rule out dyslexia at the same time. So I want to be careful.
It's just not
There
a
may
symptom.
be other things going on,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
not a defining characteristic of
Yes.
dyslexia.
Yeah.
So we probably need to bust that myth. And regarding to letters that, moving around on the page, I think, there's also that myth needs to be debunked as well, because I think it's to do with how the child might relate it to you.
Yes.
And they might just say, they're obviously putting their sounds perhaps in wrong orders to what you can see. And we sometimes assume that must mean that they're visually seeing them that way. Not necessarily. It's just how the brain has processed those sounds and symbols, and they've come out that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like that's the big two, I think.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think, there is this general myth too that dyslexia um, has to do with intellect. And in fact, it is, couldn't be further from the truth. Because to actually be assessed as dyslexic, we generally, many psychologists will run a cognitive assessment.
Mm.
They're really trying to rule out whether the child, is struggling because of more of an
Intellectual capacity.
intellectual, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, so to have dyslexia, you actually have to have sound intellectual capacity. And so really you may be a bit low average, but that's fine. High average cognitive abilities for people with dyslexia. So it has nothing to do with intellect. And I think that's that time to say, hey, did you know that reading and writing is just a human invention?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It has nothing to do with, there was never a brain, that still isn't an area of the brain designated for it. We have to borrow areas of the brain in order to sort of translate these symbols and sounds. It's not related to intelligence in any way. In fact, they think about 50% of NASA employees are dyslexic.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
We know Albert Einstein was dyslexic because
Mm-hmm.
we can see how his brain, was wired, and they, it's such a shame.
I feel like in a way it's like that beautiful image that you may have seen where someone tells off a goldfish for not being able to win a
Oh,
running race.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%.
Like if
Yeah.
they have a difficulty in the capacity to navigate the translation of words to language and sounds in their brain, it's got nothing to do. Those two things aren't linked. Intelligence and they're not linked at all.
They are not
Um,
linked at all. It's actually, it's so sad, because I think our children, that is probably when we talk about shame and
mm,
embarrassment and the self-esteem issues that come along with dyslexia, I think it's generally related mostly to that concept, because people judge, there's this judgment that if you can't read or write, or, your math isn't strong, then, it must be to do with you're not necessarily, not a clever person. And the kind of stories that our children are telling themselves about themselves, the things we hear daily, it, oh gosh, Carly, it breaks your heart, because it's so not based on fact.
no, and they're so vulnerable in terms of,
So,
those voices at that age.
yeah.
That's horrendous. It's really outdated as well. I can kind of understand how that premise may have arisen when we had
Mm.
classrooms where children weren't given the capacity for support, so they would fall behind.
Yes.
And we didn't have the understanding that we had now. And so therefore it would be deemed that they just weren't smart.
Yes.
But knowing what we know now,
Yes.
that's got to go.
Yes.
Gotta
And I
go.
think it is. I think we're living probably in the best age so far for kiddies with a specific learning disorder, especially in terms of assistive tech, but
Mm,
also in terms of understanding.
yeah.
So I think you're right. I think it's a thing of the past, but unfortunately, um, I
It still
doubt
shakes
the
around.
child feeling it
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
par and just judging themselves, by it. But so that, that's the other one I'd love to debunk.
Before
Better
you
than
jump
that,
forward, there's
please.
something I just want
Yeah,
to recommend to parents because
yeah,
it can happen in a range of spaces. This feeling that I'm not smart because of
yes,
certain things to do with a neurodivergence that make a classroom learning environment challenging. Um, you know, Mr. Six for us with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder has a range of things that are very complicated for him, and anything to do with the academic space is really hard. For any child that needs 20 repetitions, he needs 200. It's really
yes,
hard for him. We do a lot of work talking to him about different types of intelligence and different ways that you can achieve, and that not everybody is good at everything. And here are the things you're great at, and other people can't necessarily do that. There's a really beautiful storybook that reinforces it, and it's pretty easy to find these days, and it's called All the Ways to Be Smart.
yes.
And if you haven't seen it and you haven't read it to your child, get it from the library, buy it from the bookstore, because it really does cover this beautiful spectrum of I'm artistic, I'm mathematical, I am creative. These are the ways that I choose to express who I am and how smart I am. And it's just a really colourful, beautiful discussion you can have with your children. So,
You know, we have, so from a specific learning disorders, more specifically to that, there is a beautiful book as well. So
oh,
I know
awesome.
that
Please
just in case
share.
this goes on YouTube, I'm going to show you the actual front cover so you can
Yes.
actually write, so you can see it. But it's called
Fantastic.
Extraordinary People, and it's written by Kate Griggs, who is one of the founders of Made by Dyslexia, which is a UK charity. But 100%, just like that beautiful other book you were talking about, if I flick to the back, it's really talking about how you may be one of the storytellers, you might be a maker, you might be an entertainer, a mover, an imaginer, just generally like flicks through all of the types of possibilities and strengths that you draw on those, particularly if you're dyslexic. Yeah,
Thank
so I
you.
recommend that one.
I
Yeah.
think that's great because anything that also allows us to have approachable conversations with our kids about these things is
Yes.
great as well. And books are
Yeah.
so good for that.
We keep that on our coffee table at work, and I see, as parents are waiting, they pick it up, and it's just perfect for them to be reading themselves sometimes. So they've got some language to
Yes.
help,
And
spur
some
them on.
messaging that they can
Oh,
take on as well. Because let's be
absolutely.
honest, we feel for the future of our little people.
Oh,
And we don't know how to talk to them about the grief we're feeling about that for them. And that gives us a little piece as well. So,
that's so true. That is so true. We have a wall at work that has just all of the famous faces, all the people you could Ed Sheeran and Prince William, Prince Harry,
mm,
who are dyslexic, and we have them all up on the wall. And then one of the areas is this little mirror, and it has like so you can put your face up there as well, and then around it just says the next architect, the next inventor, the next when you look at that
yes.
Steve Jobs up there with his iPhone, and it's so important, but
Yes, it is.
great as well for the parents who walk in to feel like, oh, okay, I'm feeling empowered.
Yeah.
The children are feeling empowered.
Yeah.
So if I could possibly just debunk maybe just two more myths that
Please.
come up.
Please.
One might be that dyslexia can be outgrown. And I think it is important as parents to understand that dyslexia or any of our specific learning disorders, they are lifelong, and we can move within severity. So, there's mild, moderate, severe. And some of the kiddies we work with, oh gosh, it's so rewarding, Carly, because we can see through assessments then that they've moved perhaps from moderate to mild now.
Yes.
And that just means that, they're feeling better, they're feeling great, but they're accessing, the literacy and
Yes.
so many more things for them
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So look, it is lifelong, but I don't think we get, that's fine. We just need to know though that with the right and given strategies, and as long as that it really is important that you're using evidence-based interventions. That as long as we're doing these things, there's a wonderful chance that we're going to be able to move the severity of it and how it impacts day to day.
Fabulous. And
Yeah.
I think these myths come up that you grow out of it because the reality is, as humans, we learn how to either hide it or
Oh,
support it.
Yes, we
Or
cope.
both.
Yep, yep, yep.
Or both. So people
100%.
used to think you grew out of ADHD as well.
Yes, yeah.
You don't grow out of ADHD. You just find your way to hide it. And then when you can't hide it, you hide it home.
Yeah, that absolutely. And look, maturity, especially if we're talking about our kiddies, maturity is going to kick in. You're right; they're going to get better coping strategies. We just got to be careful, don't we, that they don't become sort of just unhelpful strategies,
Correct.
and like you're saying, like you maybe the avoidance strategies start
Yes.
kicking in, and so obviously that as as we would always say, the earlier you can get in to help, the better, because we'll start help, um, on the long run. Um, then I suppose the last thing I would say is that, dyslexia has nothing to do with being lazy or not trying hard enough. And unfortunately, I think in the very early days, and I can understand this as parents, in the very early days, it can come across as, oh, just try harder. There's, you could do this if you put your effort into it. Oh gosh, it's such, I would think it's almost insulting, to our kiddies who
Yeah.
are likely trying
They're
5
trying so
times harder
hard.
than
Yeah.
everyone else.
Yeah.
And it's not a motivation issue. They want, Ross Green says, doesn't he, like,
Kids
kids
will
do
do
well if
well
they
if they
can.
can.
And
Yes.
nobody chooses to feel this way and to
Right.
not succeed. So, let's debunk that myth. They're flipping trying.
Oh,
They
yeah.
just, they need you to help support it and to keep the encouragement on the effort, not the result.
And
Yeah.
isn't it amazing as well, that thought? Because our kids, they can't see inside other brains.
Yeah.
They don't understand that other brains aren't working the way theirs are. They can't say, Mum, my brain is different.
Yes. No,
We've
that's
got to
so
recognize
true.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. I think they're the ones that come up
Be
the
great.
most often with me.
Mhm.
So I hope that's helpful.
There's some things to tell Grandpa when he
Yes.
starts to comment on your child's
Oh,
reading.
so true. It's so true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, um, so different signs at different ages. I think this is really helpful. I just want to jump in here because while we're talking, it's just made me think, and I'm mentally written down, just for listeners. I think we need to do a future episode around assisting with advocacy because, as you were saying, Natalie, like often there's this wait and see. People are scared of labels. They're scared of
Yeah.
applying a label too early. And everything we know is that the earlier it's recognised, the earlier we can provide them with the supports and interventions that help them succeed and also help their self-esteem. Um,
I always say
so,
to my parents, the story they're telling themselves is so much worse
mm,
than the label that will can empower. Like, oh,
correct.
that's why, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
exactly
with
right.
you.
And also, a child is only going to feel about a label how you put that label forward as
Yes,
well. So, um,
absolutely.
so just as a little aside, I'm going to work on that because I think that, there are ways that we can help build a parent's confidence to be
Yeah.
able to say, no, we're not waiting to see.
Yes.
We're doing this. So,
Oh, thank you. Because actually, in regards to specific learning disorders, you can assess them so much earlier than you think. And
so there's a myth. There
yeah,
used to be a myth that you could only assess for these things once they were over the age of 8.
no,
Mm,
incorrect. Yeah,
go.
incorrect. So really, from an assessment point of view, you need to be, let's say, 6 months into kindergarten at least. So if we
Mhm,
take that as a minimum,
mhm,
and then what you want to hope is that the school has flagged, or your gut instincts flagged, and now we're starting to talk.
mhm.
And that then the child has then been taken into a support intervention.
Yes.
So what that looks like, and it's actually part of the criteria for assessment, they actually have to have had 6 months at least of RTI, so response to intervention.
Mhm.
Meaning, we need to check that if we provided you just with this extra really quality support, will you bounce back? Will you
Yes.
close the um, and to be honest, it's the child who doesn't close the gap or react to that really solid extra support that we want to see,
Yeah.
because they're the child that has something extra going on,
Yes.
and we need to get in early. So yes, there's a few assessment tasks that perhaps you should be over 7, not in regards to dyslexia, but in regards to dysgraphia. But with dyslexia, you can get in quite early, as long as that response to intervention has been implemented. And that just looks like the child's been, goes off in that small group with a learning support teacher. And we're really pushing for 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes each time. So if your school can't offer that, I would think you go in and ask
Yeah, go in and do it if you
politely,
can.
firmly, or that's the minimum really, to start seeing some progress. And then after 6 months, ask about reassessment. Okay, how did they go? Did they respond? And if they haven't, you can come and see us, or go and see a psychologist, because you've actually met criteria. But what that means is you're talking about the end of kindergarten,
Yeah, fantastic.
that you could be officially, understanding and meeting criteria for dyslexia.
And then by the time they go to prep, where phonics and things really start to ramp up, you're already in the process of getting them supported. That's so good to know. That's so
Yes,
good to know.
it is. And I think regarding sort of these, this Ausspell guide, and what we were talking about, the different signs at different ages, as a parent, even before school, there are a few little flags. So if I let you know, just a couple, it might be that the child has difficulty with oral rhyming, syllabification, so breaking words into syllables, and blending and segmenting sounds. So all oral. And the adage goes, if you can't do it, if a child struggles to do things with sounds orally, think how difficult it will be when the symbol comes in. So you have to be able to do it orally first. So if, as a preschooler, and so we're from New South Wales, so I might be using a few different terms. I'm not sure if but so it is to do with that rhyming, and sometimes that comes down to nursery rhymes as well. And he's just thinking, oh, did you having trouble picking up that beautiful rhythm and connection? And it may to do with speech and language development. So there's a little risk factor there if the child has already had some early speech and language difficulties. So you just keep an eye on those kiddies that little bit more, and you let your kindergarten teacher know that, hey, let's keep an eye on this, and how they're going to work now with symbols and sounds. If they've had difficulty picking up letter names, because what I'd love to see is that from preschool, from the early ages, we're singing a sounds-a-bet song, not an alphabet song, right? So I would love to be hearing the sounds being strung together and learn that way. But if they're having difficulty just picking up the letter names, and that sort of rapid retrieval of letters and sounds and things like that, then they might be, a little one to watch as we head into kindergarten and early years of school. Once you're in early years of school, it really is about being able to isolate and manipulate sounds. And these are all things you can be doing in the car on your travels to soccer practice and the things like that. Is you play with words, and to the point of like, okay, buddy, if I had the word cat and I took off the k sound, what word would I have left? And seeing if they can hear at and manipulate that orally. And then you might say, well, then if I added on the sound to the beginning, now what would the word make? Right? And then you can start playing with the beginning, the end, the middle, which is quite interesting. And if your child is having difficulty with being able to do that, then they're the child that may be at risk. They're little characteristics that we would see. So they're things that you can do at home as a parent, just checking in. Their child with dyslexia in primary school is also the kiddie with slow and laborious reading. As we said before, it's to do with accuracy and fluency. So, their reading is just so slow, and it's almost painful for them, bless them. They're maybe starting to avoid it. They're disinterested in reading, those sorts of things you might see early. And trouble decoding, which is that, um, being able to break the words into its sounds or into its chunks, its syllable chunks. Being, having difficulty tackling unfamiliar words, not really having a strategy because it doesn't really work for them. It's not really making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. I find it really interesting in what it looks like in a high schooler too, because like we said, if you are quite a smart little cookie and you have got through primary school under the radar,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
remembering that because it is mild to severe, if you're just mildly dyslexic, there's a good chance that you are just sitting just under, and that you may slip through those cracks. And so I think, especially if your behaviors, if you're not flagging any of those other concerns, I think it's in high school then where some of our young people will it will be a little bit more obvious, and that's because the academic you know content's got that much harder, hasn't it? And they're slower than their peers in being able to read through everything, slower being able to get those assignments done, and in tests, that kind of thing. They have organizational difficulties. I think that was one of the other myths probably to include, is that dyslexia isn't just related to reading and spelling. You will see little snippets in other areas of life that revolve around sequencing and planning and working memory, processing speed,
Yeah.
reasoning. And so that might come out in high school years as well. So just, the child that has difficulty planning and is that little bit more disorganized, they also have a lack of interest in reading.
Of course.
And,
Makes total
um,
sense.
yeah,
It's complex for them.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. So that, from, yeah, they're those main little markers, I suppose. And then it tends to come out obviously much more obviously in assessments. And when you're in high school, there's an assessment task you can ask your teachers, learning support teachers, to use, which is called the YARC. And bring it up if you're in a learning and support meeting. Just say, hey, would it be worth just running the YARC, which is the York sort of assessment of reading, and it's yeah, that's a nice little screening tool that we can look at a teenager's fluency, speed, accuracy, and where they're sitting against their peers, and if and their comprehension, because that often starts lacking if reading is, difficult. So yeah, so I think there is some things for parents to take to these meetings.
Definitely. Can I just ask a quick little bit as well? I've just thought of
Yeah.
one that I think would be great. And I'm guessing
Yes.
it's a myth. And the reason I'm guessing it's a myth is it's one of these things we're learning about neurodivergences of the brain and how they used to be seen gender trends, and we're starting to understand them a little more. There used to be a belief that dyslexia was something that predominantly impacted boys.
Oh, yes. No. Let's
And
debunk.
in my head, I'm thinking girls are actually, they're just better maskers.
They're
So
pretty good.
am I
Yeah.
on the money?
You're on the money. Well, there's certainly not a statistical, difference between the boys and the girls. And, it's really good to know that even amongst cultures around the world, it's seen as well. So, no, we're all fair game. I
All
think
brains are
that,
equal.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think there, in that point, it might be worth noting, though, that there is a family hereditary, you know, um,
Pathway.
predisposition there. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that might be the case. And certainly amongst siblings, there is a higher percentage rate of being dyslexic if your sibling is. But no, between boys and girls, no. And look, why? It's really interesting because in Australia, we say 1 out of 10 children are dyslexic. Well, overseas in the UK, for example, they say 1 in 5.
Um,
And it's really interesting because you think, well, dyslexia is dyslexia. So what are we? Because but I think in Australia we are still under diagnosing. Well, and so therefore, sure, those girls who are happy to sort of just
Fight their way through,
fight
unfortunately.
absolutely. And maybe boys, there's a frustration level that comes with being dyslexic, and maybe they're showing it in that little bit more of, bit more through their actions, and the girls probably, unfortunately, internalizing perhaps a little bit more. When you get home, it generally tends to come out. So
Comes
that's
out
why,
regardless.
parents, it's so good for you to listen to your niggles, because they may not be showing at school. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, my pleasure. That was a good one. That was a good one.
And I've taken you away. You were going to give us some tips on spotting language-based dysgraphia.
Yes.
So
Let
I'll let you
me.
go back to that. I'll stop taking you off the path.
No, please, because that was really important. But regarding language-based dysgraphia, so I think it's something that even our teachers are still trying to, they're still learning about. So as parents, bring it up. They, in the Ausspelled guide, it will be called a specific learning disorder in written expression.
Okay.
And that's how it may come across on an assessment from a psychologist. It may use that term. And actually, in regards to dyslexia, it will come up as a specific learning disorder in reading and spelling, something like that. The terms dyslexia is still a known term, and it's in the DSM-4 that we use, but the term language-based dysgraphia will be known as written expression difficulties.
Okay.
So firstly, I think it's important to know that there is motor-based dysgraphia and language-based dysgraphia. The motor-based has that handwriting difficulty, and the language-based is much more to do with how they get their thoughts and ideas out on paper, and then the quality of that written expression. So what that might look like in a child preschool is that they may have difficulty again with, let me just get this right. So they may have difficulty with adequate writing for their age. So maybe they're not interested, because if it's a motor dysgraphia particularly, it could hurt. It could actually physically hurt. And if it's a language-based dysgraphia, it's going to look a bit more like poor spelling, maybe in those early years, and it might look a little bit more like poor basic grammar and sentence structure. And so when it comes into those, early years of primary school, that's what you're looking for as well. It's really down to, they're not picking up the punctuation and the grammar the same way as maybe their peers are. They're not fluent writers. They avoid writing. And the big one that we get, especially as you get older into primary school, is I can't get my ideas out.
Yep.
And even when they do, there may be a difference between the quality. So, if generally our kiddies with specific learning disorders have quite good, to be honest, oral abilities. And so really you're thinking, okay, well, if you had to tell me this story orally, what would the quality of that story be like? And as I said in that, even in our Extraordinary People book, we get the best storytellers who may have a, specific learning disorder. So if they could tell you orally, it would be great. And if in an assessment, if I could assess orally and tell you about the Great Wall of China, it would be great. But when it comes down to how to write it, perhaps their paragraphing is out, their full, their structure of the text is out. They've decided that I'd rather write a little bit. So the quality, because it's hard, you're only getting a fifth of what they could, their potential, or you get a lot, but it's very jumbled and it's really hard to sort of break through and understand. So you could see those two markers. Either way, they're not meeting the quality of the oral expression. And I think in high school, very, very similar. You're really just looking at speed as well from a writing point of view. They're just that really slow and laborious, and the poor spelling flags. So in dyslexia, if we think about it as reading and spelling, and language-based dysgraphia as writing and spelling, that's how you would maybe bring those two together.
And so I'm picking up that if you thought your child might be struggling and it was laborious because maybe they were having difficulty with handwriting,
Yes.
that if you popped them onto, say, a computer, they can use a keyboard proficiently. If they
Yes.
still had the same difficulties,
Yes.
that's a really good indicator that it's
that's
going on cognitive. Yeah. Okay. Beautiful.
Great call. So for us at work, that's what we would do. We would give them the computer, and then we would, if they had a motor base as well. So, and that's not uncommon, is that perhaps they do actually have that handwriting difficulty as well. So in that case, that's an OT really can help in that space. And then if you're looking at educational therapy or those specialist supports, they're really coming in from the language support. Probably good to know there too that even in dyslexia, you can see some letter formation difficulties. Not from a backward, as you were saying, it doesn't mean that they're inherent. It just means that they are just struggling generally with these symbols. And so you do need to practice them.
Yeah.
Yes. So one thing I will say about motor dysgraphia, and if a child does have difficulty with handwriting, is that the International Dyslexia Association really encourages cursive or running writing, which, you correct me, in South Australia, do you already teach cursive from kindergarten? Do you know?
So Victorian.
Victorian, right. So
it's funny. It actually varies school to school.
Okay, well, there we go. So in New South Wales, we have sort of our foundation font, and it is printed. But the Dyslexia Association really talks about how cursive can be so beneficial. So if your child comes to us, for specialized support, we'll take them straight to cursive because it's faster, and our children literally need that extra time because of the neurological pathways that they're using. Two, there's this idea that when you write in cursive, the word becomes one unit instead of a series of strokes. And those series of strokes have all got to be thought of individually, right? So when the motor memory takes over. And three, for our kiddies with dyslexia, if you can write running writing, you've got a much better chance of reading somebody's running writing. And that's, important too. So just as an aside, as we do, that is really probably something to think about.
Oh, we get to the day where when they set out education curriculums, they take all stuff into consideration.
So I think there is definitely that motor base and the language base, but the language base has a lot more to do with your accurate and fluent written expression. Yeah. And then from a math perspective, should we go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So this one's quite interesting because I think there's a myth that, if you're dyscalculic, you just have this general difficulty with math in general. And that's so far from the truth as well. It's actually, you can actually have some strengths in certain areas of math. Dyscalculia is much more related to number sense and the quantities of numbers, understanding numbers. And then it's to do with procedural knowledge, whether you actually can apply the correct strategies. And it might have to do with, fast facts recall.
Yes. Yep.
And being able to use sort of the operations and having that they mean something and what, when and why. So even the vocabulary of numbers and number sense. So in those early years, you're really looking at kiddies who may have difficulties recognizing printed numbers. They don't have much of a meaning, and it's really hard if you're not dyscalculic, I think, to understand this. But the number 3 means nothing compared to the number 2. The idea of quantities is are not formed the same.
Abstract art.
Right.
Yes. Some people get it. You're the person who doesn't. You look at it and it's that's a green circle. What's a green circle all about?
Yes. But so it's really, you have to drill down into something called subitizing, where it's, those dots that you might see on the dominoes. really that understanding that, well, when you see sort of 5 of those versus when you see 6, it means something different. So those kiddies could really have difficulty then with concepts of more and less, when you drill back even further. So thinking about that from a preschool situation or early school, delays in using effective strategies is also, they've gone the long way around. In math, we sort of have, we call the inchworm and the grasshopper. And the inchworm is the person who, you see every single stroke of every single part of that math calculation they're making. And it's maybe taken them 10 minutes to come up with the answer. That would be inefficient. But then you may have the grasshopper who's done it all mentally and they've skipped straight ahead. Perhaps it's wrong because they haven't got the procedural knowledge of how to even do that on paper, how to carry, how to, and so that's inefficient as well because it's not working. So you see sort of these strategies that aren't quite helpful, and they have difficulty remembering facts. Arithmetic facts. So, and this now starts moving yourself into earlier and later primary school. That child who struggles so hard with times tables facts. And even number bonds, we call them. That 7 and 3 is 10, and 6 and 4 is 10, and it sounds. When we work with our kiddies, we take them right back there, and I can understand that parents would be thinking, "Oh gosh, why are we going back there? My child's in year 4." But at the end of the day, it all relates, because if you don't know that 6 and 4 is 10, then 60 and 40 is not 100, or 16 and 4 is not 20. And it all, even to money and currency and budgets, and it's all those fast facts that often we just take for granted, but we can't assume that our children have them. And if you notice these sorts of errors in fast facts, I think as a parent, it's have that conversation with your teacher and bring up the term dyscalculia, and hopefully the teacher's got a bit of knowledge about it, or at least they may go and find out more and can do some assessing. But that's sort of your key little areas. The other thing that really flags for children with dyscalculia is telling the time. So I should say my daughter also has dyscalculia. I missed that one. And she really struggles at 15 to tell the time now still, which means that sort of, organizational skills and planning, we really use, we use a lot more digital time than analog. Analog is very abstract, and that can really, be a point of, So digital, I find, works better for my kiddies. But telling the time, even, months of the year, the days of the week, these sorts of things are little flags as well. I think when we're talking about, it has quite a lot to do with sequencing. And so, have a look at those sorts of things if your children aren't quite picking it up. And I think we might have, and increased anxiety around math. And I think the other important to know that there is actually something separate called math anxiety. And it's a type, it's an anxiety on its own, where it's, just really related to math, but you don't have to be dyscalculic in order to have math anxiety. So always just keep that in the back of your mind, as well as parents. If your child is struggling, more so getting started with math, they just hate math, it may not be that they're dyscalculic, they just may have an anxiety about it, that's worth looking into in its own right. But dyscalculia, yes, of course, will bring on its own anxieties. And there's a new little statistic that I heard recently that's saying that it's not literacy anymore that will be the big impact in a workplace and for employment. It'll be your innumeracy, being innumerate, being unable to work with your facts and figures. And I think if you even just think about working in a shop, right, as, a cashier, or all those jobs that involve money handling and budgeting and planning and the rest.
As a tradie.
Oh, exactly. When you have to add those together, the concepts involved. So you can see it again is one of those things you have to jump on. You need to get into it early, because again, exists between mild and severe, and we can certainly work within that. In high school, as things get harder, as the concepts and I think, more abstract math comes in, you're really looking at those kiddies who are just struggling to get past the more fundamental math. And then, that really flags in high school, I think. And they have difficulty sort of finding more than one way to go about it. So if, they've only got that one way, maybe still even using their fingers to count because they don't have that automaticity, and that, that fast facts recall. And as I said, probably poor perception of time as a high schooler as well. Might be a little red flag.
Fantastic. And look, you've got some great things talking about complexities for them in terms of how these disorders can increase challenges. Would you like to sort of share some of those with us? Some of the things, I guess the really great thing about some of these is that they're not necessarily what you would deem as being obvious.
Yes.
Which is really, really great to share. I'll let you go.
So 100%, I think it's really important to know that firstly, dyslexia doesn't turn off when the school bell rings. And I just think that is just so important for our parents to know as well. So, yes, the things that make life difficult are in school, but out of school as well. And it's about the difficulty reaching your potential. So I think in the school, particularly, if we talk about the fact that, if we just talk about dyslexia for a sec, the idea, being able to read touches every single subject, doesn't it? Including math. So for one, you're going to see that this child is going to likely have difficulty across all areas.
Yep.
If their, reading difficulty is impactful enough, they, I really feel for them, because these are the children who would struggle in the class play, because to audition, you have to read from the script. They struggle because they're the ones who fumble around or are so anxious to get up on stage to run the school assembly. They've got to go to the canteen and order something. Well, can they read the menu that's not sticking on on their screen? There's so many ways that dyslexia affects our beautiful babes in everyday life, let alone just in the classroom. I just think about reading permission notes, reading excursion notes, being able to empower yourself to know what's going on before your parents have to tell you, or so I think it's really mindful to think about those difficulties, but also how much effort, as we said, is being put in. So the brain breaks and the drink breaks, and your brain is a muscle. They are using it. They're running that sort of cross-country marathon most lessons. So they need a lot of water. They need brain breaks. They need that beautiful time, that extra time. And when we talk about extra time, it is so critical, but it's sort of biologically critical or neurologically critical, because the way that kiddies with dyslexia are wired, their neurological pathways are come through the right-hand side before it gets to the lower left.
Wow.
So and we know, like in gestation, I think it's something about the 27th week that the pathways are laid. And these pathways are often frayed or they're incomplete. And so we are literally, through sort of our structured language interventions, building, repairing these pathways so that the children can access this lower left more directly. Other children have this direct route. So it's beautiful direct route straight to it. But in very real terms, our children are requiring extra time. So because it actually, the way I sort of describe it is, it's like we're on a freeway to Sydney. Well, our kiddies might have to go out by Dubbo to get there. They're going to get there in the end if you give them the time, but it's not the direct freeway route. So I think being aware that there's so much more effort involved, they need extra time, they are likely highly frustrated. And this is a difficulty that we see because they're intelligent young people, and they are feeling it. And they're like, why did I get this yesterday and not today? And I think even regarding the little red flags of dyslexia, it's when the kiddie skills are inconsistent. So, for example, you might even be you're listening to them read, and they got the word in this line, but they didn't get it in the next one. And you're like, you just had it. Like, where'd it go? Or they get the big words and they didn't get the little words. And it's just so inconsistent. Or today they did reverse, a C, but tomorrow the C was fun, they reversed the F. Like, there's so many little inconsistencies that you think that the child in themselves must be so frustrated in school.
Yes.
So, man, and it's all to do with how they're firing and how they're processing in that moment. So, we can talk about cognitive sort of overload as well, where how anxiety plays into it all. And if you're so anxious and your cup is full and you've only got really 80% anxiety and you've got 20% left to actually put to this task, and you're already going to struggle at the task, we really have to take into account what that child is already dealing with.
Most definitely. And the higher our stress goes, the less capable we are of actually accessing our cortex anyway. So the poor things are really up against it.
Really up against it. So it's really, really the parent and the teacher's responsibility, really, to be able to bring that child into that safe space of, I get you, I understand, how can I help? And allowing them to free up as much sort of cognitive space as they can to tackle that task. So children also may feel, dyslexia is difficult for them in school because they may even still be asked to read aloud. Now, I would hope, Cully, that we are not still in that time where, do you remember, I don't know if it was the same for you, but I remember in school where, we'd all had the same book and the person at the front started and then we'd all have to read, the next paragraph in a row. And I remember going ahead. Did you, you skip ahead to go, oh, which is the one I'd have to read? And then you almost practice it and you're not even listening to the person before you. No. Because even as a non-dyslexic, I'm still anxious about the fact that you read
aloud. Oh my
God. Yeah. And you don't want to stumble. You don't want to embarrass yourself, any of these things. Well, if you're dyslexic, I mean, for goodness sake.
This is shame, which is so unfair.
Public shame. And I think as a teacher, there's so much more you can learn from saying, who would like to read? Or put it out there. Who would like to read? And the people who don't put their hand up, that tells you something, right, as a teacher. So take note of that and perhaps you can, use that for your insight. But
as the teacher that says, Sarah, you never read. Can you stand up and give us a paragraph?
What is the reason they are never reading and putting themselves forward? I know. And that's something that comes up a lot. So we often ask our kiddies to sort of do a bit of self-rating about how they feel about certain things so we can pass that on to their teachers. And it always comes up about reading aloud. That's there. There's some data that talks about how extreme that fear is. It's the same fear as people have about sharks and, it's massive. So let's not do that. And when I say that as well, I know even my daughter had the experience of teachers still asking them to call out their spelling results, just in front of everybody. And I thought, no wonder she doesn't want to go to school on a Friday, and you don't learn about this until you drill down just as a parent.
Of course not.
Sit in the awkward. Ask questions, sit and wait and see what comes out. And sometimes you have to listen for these little tidbits and go, that would make a lot of sense.
I often find, by the way, my little tip, and I think other parents have done this as well, is that moment before bed when they're getting ready to go to sleep, there seems to be a vulnerability shield that drops. And you get all kinds of beautiful, honest information that you wouldn't have gotten during the day. So if you need to find that little nugget, sometimes go and just sit with them when they're getting ready to go to sleep and it'll come out.
100% agree with you. 100% agree. And you're going to find out any of the little anxieties they've got about tomorrow might come up then. And I agree. Beautiful time to do it. And I also do think in the car, I really do.
You're not looking at each other.
No, it's that 100% you don't have to have the forced eye contact. You can just keep it quite casual. And I really find the car is a good place for some of those conversations.
Yep.
So just lastly, I think regarding in school anyway, is still the idea of being misunderstood. And I think as teachers do get more and more knowledgeable of dyslexia, hopefully this will change. But I think for me, being misunderstood is still carried today because there's this idea of integrating the needs of the child with dyslexia instead of including.
Yep.
They're totally different things. And when we're integrating, okay, Johnny, well, I'm going to get to you in a minute. I'm just going to set up everybody else, and then I'm going to come and get to you and set up your assistive tech or whatever it might be. And I think to myself, we're still saying, yeah. I'll still us and them. Whereas the inclusionary idea is and remembering that if we are honestly thinking that it's one in 10 at the minimum, but perhaps 1 in 5 kiddies, we're talking about 3 to 6 children in every classroom who may have dyslexia.
May benefit from those learning strategies.
So it's like offer it to everybody. I know assistive tech's a bit hard. I probably picked the wrong one there because, logistically it can be tricky. But there's other things that we put in place, adjustments and accommodations that we put in place, and we only reserve them for that one child. And I'm sure this is across other universities as well. But whereas you think if you just made them available and watch the children who come and use them, that tells you a little something, but also gives them that chance to just accept that, that'd be really helpful for me. Thank you. I'm sure you and I still use the television remote, which was actually designed for people with physical disabilities in the beginning, right? And so they couldn't get up and turn the good old-fashioned TV on. We love the television remote. Everybody,
I can't even believe that there was never a remote.
So I think let's start the stigma and that the misunderstanding still comes because we're still doing ad hoc adjustments and ad hoc accommodations. Like, oh yeah, that's right, I need to do this for you. Or you just do 3 questions. Everybody else, you do 10. It's like we're really not planning likely enough or putting enough thought into it. And it's so hard, Carly, because as a teacher and from the classroom, I really do understand the challenges of the teacher to accommodate, right, and to be what each child needs for you to be in this moment. I mean, I have 3 children. I have trouble being what they need in a moment. You've got 30 in a class. It is so difficult. So you know what? A shout out to the teachers. I have so much utmost respect. I think it's more systemic thing that we need to start looking more at a whole school culture, the whole school system.
Already discussed in this particular section. Teachers work their butts off. They care passionately about their children. The structures do not support that. That the curriculum needs to be less loaded, that classrooms need to be smaller, that education support staff should be standard in every classroom. We need to be thinking about the ways that teachers can actually do their best for those to get their best.
I think that's the point then that, dyslexia doesn't come with any specific funding inside schools. We're really drawing from the pool, in New South Wales, I should say, and we're really drawing from a general pool. And that pool is, not big. And so I think, that's it as well, where you understand that the teachers are up against it. They would probably love to put in this and this and this recommendation, but likely the resources are just not providing it. So yes, it's probably an important point for me, definitely, to say out loud. Love you teachers. I think lastly, just inside the school setting, is the idea of timed tests and timed, pressured tasks. I think that is a difficulty for our children in the most.
Do you have NAPLAN in New South Wales?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do. But you know what I just heard too? That there's schools now starting to do on the alternate year. Um, on the alternate year, they're putting in another massive test, um, very similar to NAPLAN. And I think testing's fine as long as it's useful, as long as you are actually analyzing it and you are going to use it to the best of your ability. If it is literally just for a data sheet, and you're just collecting these results, and you still don't know about the child who can carry, and regroup their hundreds. I feel desperately sorry for the amount of testing that our children go through. But that's probably another.
I can't watch it on the YouTube video. I just pushed all the way back in my chair in shock. Yeah. As we said, there's a whole other episode there.
Let's go
around that.
But outside of school, it's really important because it's where parents come in as well, to hearing what are the difficulties for a child with dyslexia in other scenarios. And I think this is where, unfortunately, we have to take into account that kids with dyslexia have a much higher rate of mental health difficulties as they become teenagers. So they have a much higher rate of juvenile delinquency. They have a much higher rate of suicide. They have a much higher rate of anxiety and poorer health outcomes. So, I think it's as young adults, and as we said, dyslexia doesn't, is with you for life. So what if you can't read the back of the Panadol packet? How do you look after your health if you can't fill out the form perhaps correctly at the dentist because it's got so much jargon in it that you're not sure whether you're ticking all these sorts of histories that you may need to let people know about if you can't read the words or if you're having difficulty. And so I think there's, we need to, as a society, also start moving towards what are we doing with forms? How else can we be inclusive of that 10 to 20% of the population who will likely struggle with this? And so can I just say on the side, I did actually say to my dentist the other day, so could you just tell me what would you do if I couldn't read this? I wanted to know, what is your, what's your strategy? What are you going to do? Yeah. And I think they were absolutely shocked. And they said, well, I guess I could just read it to you. But the way that they sort of went about it, I thought, oh, you're not prepared. You don't really haven't thought this out at all. So outside of the classroom, because we owe it, because we live in a literate society and a numerate society, to consider that up to 20% of people who may have difficulty. And so, if you're a parent, even with a small business, or, your frontline in your work, it's keeping in mind that maybe 1 out of 5 people who walk through your door in the shops or in the office could be dyslexic, and they could do with a hand, likely, in a very, supportive. And the best way to do that is to ask everybody, so that when the next person walks in and you do have this a dyslexic individual sitting and waiting, the next person gets asked the same thing. They're not going to feel, just everybody just, make it part of your day. Again, it's just a little aside, but I think it could likely make the difference between even accurate information that you're collecting from adults who may be dyslexic. And then I think, yes, it's down to those practical things like their ability to read a traffic sign when you're driving. Okay, so we can get through our L's and we could get through our P's with support of, the training documents. But even when you're driving, if you really have quite moderate to severe dyslexia, even trying to work out, where to get off on the freeway because of the big signs, it all assumes that and it can come down then to directions and directionality. I find, and this is purely observational, but there's a bit more higher prevalence of lefts and rights difficulties with kiddies with dyslexia.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, also, reading mum's text and replying and emails. Luckily, as I said, we live in this wonderful time now where assistive technology is going to remove so many barriers, and I am so thankful. But at the same time, it's just being aware. Well, as long as we know how to use it, and it hasn't just been a one-off teach. We can't just teach it once and expect our kiddies to know either. Like you said with your young ones, the key to anything to do with kiddies with dyslexia or specific learning disorders is to repeat. Repeat. The key is to overlearn something. So whether that's to do with overlearning your sounds and your rules of English, down to overlearning how to use your assistive tech, yes, it is a must. I think, as we said before, keeping track of time impacts out of school as well. And learning new vocabulary for your work. If you needed to learn another language other than English, I think that's difficult. And there are some language which is much more what we call transparent. English is even transparent to a point. We call it sort of 80% transparent, where if you know the sounds and symbols of sounds and rules of English, you can probably predict, or you'd be successful using them for 80% of the time. But then you've got 10% where the words are out by sort of one letter. So think of silent letters. And then you've got 10% of the vocabulary that is just completely irregular.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't follow any rules at all. Yeah.
No, comes from cultures into English. And
was drunk when they created those words.
I understand. Do you know what I tell the children? And, parents listening, your kids will love this too, I think, is there was this the invention of the printing press. Well, apparently, when that came to be, they used typesetters from Belgium and brought them over, right? And they not only spelled words incorrectly, so even in Old English, we may have spelt it E-N-Y, which would have made a lot more sense. They spelt it more to do with their Dutch sort of language, A-N-Y. And then the bit the kids love the most is that they got paid by the letter or by the sentence, right?
Yeah.
So I tell my kiddies, hence why we may have some double, they've made words longer
to use in vacuum.
Exactly. And sometimes we can relate that back to, well, that's how the typesetters, and we're still living with it today.
That's fantastic.
But I think the kids, it helps them to understand that, the language is, there is a method to the madness of why we do what we do.
Yeah.
So I think otherwise we just talk about sort of difficulties with budgeting and planning because of organizational difficulties at times, financial planning perhaps, and as we've said many times, one of the biggest difficulties is the self-esteem. It's a language processing, how the brain processes language is the issue. It's not intellect and, I think just helping children and teenagers particularly to understand that and try to lift their self-esteem as much as we can.
A really cool thing to remember there is that children often take the messages that give them as their own internal voice.
Yes.
And so the more that we can instill the message in them that they are amazing for who they are and they have all these incredible skills, the more we can strengthen their sense of self-esteem to come up against anything that goes against that when they're at school or in the workplace. If anybody says anything else, hopefully it's a little bit of armor that
100%. And I think that's where you also talk about the importance of having a strength or an interest, because even if I talk about my daughter, I swear she had an interest in animals very young, and so I just pounced on it.
Yes.
We knew Millie was dyslexic in year 1, and so from then her interest, which then turned into quite a strong knowledge base, which then made her look and feel fantastic because she knew facts and things that others didn't. Whatever it may be, if they're showing an interest, I always say to my parents, follow it, and whatever they're good at or whatever their interest is,
Lean
help
into
them to
it.
become damn good at it, you know?
Yeah.
And then in those moments, exactly like you said, Carly, when they're feeling low because of this difficulty, they have a moment to shine in this. And as parents, it could be tedious. I have so many animals in my house now. I can't even tell you. But I will say that my daughter now at 15 works at the Australian Reptile Park. And
Oh,
because she has all these skills and
so
early
great.
knowledge that
Yep.
likely for her age is above and beyond. And so I think, fabulous because she's the happiest teenager. And
Yeah.
I think it's about follow their passion, help make them good at it, and
Yeah. Proud
then
of it.
and proud and have a moment to shine. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm jumping here, and I
yeah.
noticed that you've come up with, and oh, I love these lists of the exceptional things that can come from what we often see as challenges, that they can have these amazing abilities. And I think it's just a really great way it actually falls directly in line with what we're talking about at the
Yes.
moment. It's a really great way to kind of wrap things up because we
Yes.
can talk about all of the great things that are still in front
Yes.
for these kids
Yeah.
that they can shine at, and I'd love you to elaborate on some of those.
Oh, thank you. Well, in that case, a little disclaimer about the Ausspell guide. If
Yes.
you, as a parent, if you download that and give it a great read, you'll get to a section that does talk about this, and it talks about whether the strengths or these, cognitive advantages, whether that's a myth or not.
Mm,
According to sort of the Ausfeld Association at the moment and through their guide, I think they're taking the path of that every child has individual strengths and weaknesses.
mhm,
And then they tend to take the path that says, well, the more you practice one, as I'm talking about my daughter, right, and getting
mm.
involved in the animals, then yes, she's naturally almost creating a strength out of that interest.
Yes.
So the way they come about it at the moment is they're saying, okay, I'm not sure. They're kind of keeping it a little bit open as to whether there are these true cognitive advantages of being
Mhm,
dyslexic.
mhm.
But we can see that the persistence and the take up of an interest and the follow through of it will make you strong in a certain area.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that's sort of their take. Internationally, we have other takes, and one is
Yeah.
called the difference theory. And and that's one that, if you're really invested in reframing dyslexia, and we have talked a lot about the difficulties and the challenges that you'll see, but um, I think if we're talking about raising a child's self-esteem and helping them to be excited about the future, then we really should look into this the difference theory in case
Okay.
it does apply.
Yes.
And I think the more that the evidence and research, more you research it, hopefully the more this is going to come to light. Um, because I think there's something in it. And so Made by Dyslexia, who I was saying have created that beautiful book, they are a foundation in England, and Richard Branson is, a bit of the face of it.
Mm,
Kate Griggs runs it, and they're both two beautiful dyslexics. And they have, as I said, created this book which helps explore, but they've put research and studies into this.
yeah.
And one of the things they did is they commissioned a workplace of the future,
Mhm.
and they wanted to know, well, um, firstly, they did do plenty of research, and they actually came up with areas of strength that they believed were unique to children with dyslexia, for example. And if you jump on their website on Made by Dyslexia, you will see all of this. And they do some beautiful, if you get onto their socials as well, they often do some beautiful information on it all the time. You'll also see people like Jamie Oliver having interviews, and Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom having interviews. So they've got some amazing contacts over there.
They must. Yeah. But that's Richard
Yeah.
Branson doesn't hurt.
So jump on their website, because if you're interested in the the positive reframing, they're the ones to go.
Mm,
But the other thing, as I said, is they have really found these unique strengths. Then what they've done is they've commissioned this independent research into workplaces of the future. And I'm just going to pull that up in front of me, because what they're saying is that there's going to be trending competencies. There's going to be trending and declining competencies in time for the workplaces. So things that we won't need to rely on as much, and things that we'll use more. And their research came out quite strongly suggesting that in time, and we can even see now with AI and assistive text, workplaces of the future will not need necessarily people who have, great skills in reading, writing, and math. We'll have automation to look after those, even down to time management, which I've been saying is quite a thing. That will likely get taken care of. Things to do with memory, which, working memory is cognitive. It can be, a difficulty for our kiddies. So, even the automation and how that will take care of our working memory needs. But so, and they tend to be the barriers for kiddies with dyslexia in the workplace. What we can then see is the trend, according to this research, is much more going to favour kiddies with dyslexia and what Made by Dyslexia are saying could be the unique strengths. And they're saying things like leadership and social influence, creativity and originality, initiative. As I said, we have some great storytellers. You just give them a chance, they could probably sell an ice to Eskimos. We know that 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. Right? So I just tell that to my children alone, and they're like, right, I'm in. Yes. And when I told you, I've got this beautiful wall up at work of all these beautiful faces. And when you include, as I said, things that are meaningful to them, such as Steve Jobs with the iPhone, it's quite an awesome club to be in if you start looking at it this way. And we've got to be careful we don't underestimate the challenges, because they're a common challenge amongst all people with dyslexia. But we do need to know that there is definitely research now, Made by Dyslexia is one point, who are looking into unique cognitive advantages related to dyslexia. So the other thing too is there's a beautiful initiative by an American company called Noticeability, and they actually run now courses that we're lucky enough to have access to in Australia, and I think we might be the only ones on the eastern seaboard that actually has it at the moment, which is actually a shame. We should actually have this going all over. But Noticeability has run courses in 4 areas that they believe are also cognitive strengths, which is entrepreneurial skills, architecture, and the arts, and innovation, I think. Entrepreneurial skills. So I think they've recognised as well through their research that there are at least 4 areas that tend to be these strengths and quite unique to people with dyslexia, or specific learning disorders, I think too. So then they've created courses that are dyslexia friendly in order to explore those. So if you're they're so good. And we just ran one on entrepreneurial skills and innovation. And we have a couple of teenage boys now who have started their own little business. And, you can just see that they're the little minds of the future. That big picture thinking is definitely something that researchers are playing with. And I think it's coming, that understanding that there may be these unique strengths. They are, I'm just thinking even Richard Branson and Kate Griggs have lobbied LinkedIn so that there is a little tab now on your profile that you can click saying that you're a dyslexic thinker. And he says there's this little tagline that says, big picture thinking, small typos. And I just thought, how awesome. They're really steaming along now. So for more information, jump on there, I think, and start delving into the research. I love that they're using independent researchers to start exploring it.
I think, reframing things is just everything for our kids. and to find ways to support, but then also create that strength in the future for them. It's that's the best thing we can do for them, let's be honest. So that's such a gorgeous way to wrap up this discussion.
Yes, it
Oh,
is.
my
I'm
goodness.
pleased that we got a chance to chat about that.
Oh, most definitely. Natalie, this has been the only way I can describe this. This has like been a really juicy conversation, which is really cool. I couldn't think of another word for it, but there's just a lot in it. In the best way, you know, there's so much to take away from this. And on behalf of everyone who listens to this, I'm so incredibly grateful. I also want to recognize that you've put so much heart, soul, and work into bringing this forward for this discussion. And I'm just so appreciative. So thank you so much.
I am so thankful. I work for a charity organisation, and I think the opportunity, Carly, to actually get this out to Australia. So I say thank you so much for recognising and knowing that this is a topic that we need to discuss, and that Australia needs to know about. Thank you so much for asking me on board to share. I obviously, I'm quite passionate about rules.
That's why we're here.
And I think too, exactly like you said, we're both mamas, and as much as professionals in this area. And so we're both living it from, oh my gosh, when my child has come home herself, in the heartbreak and the catastrophizing that we see, and the meltdowns and then school refusals and all of the rest. I'm living it too. And I think, thank you so much, Carly, that we get to, disseminate maybe a little bit of helpful insights, so that we can all work together.
Empower the parents. It
Yes.
empowers the children.
Yes, 100%.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Is that okay?
Be sure to check the show notes on our website for any links and references. You can find us at youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com. And if you found this episode helpful, we would love you to help us get the word out. You can share the podcast, tell a friend, and be sure to click the follow or subscribe button so you can access all our new episodes. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we would love to connect with you. You Can Grow Your Own Way recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this place, now known as Australia. We're coming to you from Jabberung, Jawajali and Wadawurrung country, the country of our guest speaker, and from wherever you are listening. We respect the elders of the past and present, and we share our friendship and kindness.